Sarah Mitchell whispered her apology as she stepped through the gleaming doors of Giovanni's. Her 6-month-old daughter nestled against her chest in a worn carrier, never knowing that the man rising from the corner table had been searching for exactly this moment for 3 years. Never knowing that beneath Daniel Carter's perfectly tailored suit and his millions in the bank lived a broken father who had buried his wife and infant daughter on the same gray morning. Never knowing that her embarrassed, trembling words, "I'm so sorry. I brought my baby," would become the first line of a love story that would heal 2 shattered souls. Never knowing that her greatest shame would become his greatest hope, that her burden would become his blessing, that this awkward, terrifying moment would be the one that saved them both. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. Sarah Mitchell's shoes were still on her feet when she finally pushed open the door to her studio apartment at 6:15 in the morning. 28 years old, and she felt ancient. The diner shift had ended at midnight, her apron still smelling of grease and burnt coffee, and then she had driven her rattling Honda to the office complex on 5th Street, where she scrubbed toilets and emptied trash cans until dawn broke over the city. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror had shown her the truth. She tried to ignore dark circles carved beneath her eyes, like bruises, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail that had started neat 12 hours ago. But now, hung limp and defeated, she closed the door with her hip, and the stack of envelopes on the tiny kitchen counter seemed to pulse with accusation. Electric bill, 47 days overdue. Rent notice, bright pink and urgent. Medical bills from Emma's 6-month checkup, the numbers swimming together into an impossible sum. Sarah dropped her purse on the floor and stood there, swaying slightly, her body screaming for sleep but her mind too wired with anxiety to rest. The apartment was barely 300 square feet, a converted storage space that the landlord generously called a studio. But it was clean because Sarah made sure it was clean, and it was filled with love, even if it was empty of everything else. Her waitress uniform clung to her like a second skin, stained with ketchup and the remnants of someone's breakfast order. She should shower. She should eat something. She should check on Emma, sleeping in the small crib pressed against the far wall, her tiny chest rising and falling with the perfect rhythm of innocent dreams. Instead, Sarah sank onto the edge of her mattress on the floor, still wearing her shoes, still wearing the exhaustion like a coat she could not remove, and let herself feel the weight of it all for just one moment before she had to be strong again. Emma's cry cut through Sarah's half-sleep at 7:30, and despite the bone-deep exhaustion, despite having slept barely an hour, Sarah smiled. She was on her feet before her eyes were fully open, crossing the small space to the crib where Emma's tiny fists pumped the air in indignant protest. "Good morning, my beautiful girl," Sarah whispered, lifting her daughter into her arms, breathing in that sweet baby smell that somehow made everything else fade away. Emma's crying stopped instantly, replaced by a toothless grin that could have powered the entire city. This was why Sarah kept going. She changed Emma's diaper with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this alone since the hospital, her movements gentle but quick, singing softly under her breath, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Her voice cracked on the words, but Emma didn't care, gurgling and kicking her feet with pure joy. Sarah carried her daughter to the kitchenette, balancing Emma on her hip while she prepared the formula with one hand, counting out the precise scoops because she had learned to make every container last as long as possible. The formula was the expensive kind, the one the pediatrician recommended, which meant Sarah often skipped meals herself to afford it. She tested the temperature on her wrist, then settled into the single chair by the window. Emma cradled in her arms, watching her daughter's eyes drift closed as she drank. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains, casting everything in gold, and Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks unchecked. She was so tired, so scared, so completely alone in this. Emma's father had vanished like smoke the moment Sarah showed him the positive pregnancy test, and she had learned that morning what abandonment truly meant. But looking down at Emma's perfect face, her tiny hand wrapped around Sarah's finger with absolute trust, Sarah felt something fiercer than exhaustion rise in her chest. Love. Ferocious, protective, all-consuming love. "I've got you," she whispered against Emma's soft hair. "I promise, baby girl, I've got you," even if she had no idea how she would keep that promise. Jessica cornered Sarah during her dinner break at the diner, sliding into the booth across from her with that determined look Sarah had learned to recognize over 15 years of friendship. "You need to start dating again," Jessica announced, pulling out her phone before Sarah could even swallow her bite of day-old pie. Sarah laughed, but it came out bitter and tired. "Jessica, I work 16 hours a day. I have a 6-month-old baby. I can barely afford diapers. Dating is not exactly on my priority list." But Jessica was already shaking her head, her dark eyes filled with the kind of stubborn compassion that had kept Sarah afloat more times than she could count. "You deserve happiness too. You deserve more than just surviving." The words hit harder than Sarah expected, and she looked away, staring at the grease-stained menu on the table. "I don't have time for happiness. I have time for Emma." "That's it." Jessica reached across the table, grabbed Sarah's hand. "Emma deserves a mother who remembers what joy feels like, and you deserve someone who won't run away like that coward did." Sarah felt the old wound open fresh. Tyler's face the moment she told him she was pregnant. The way his expression had shuttered like closing blinds. The blocked number. The empty apartment when she went looking for him. The silence that followed her into labor, into every sleepless night, into this endless exhaustion. "I can't trust anyone again," Sarah whispered. "I won't survive it if someone leaves again." Jessica squeezed her hand tighter. "Then don't trust them. Just create a profile. Just look. You don't have to meet anyone. But please, Sarah. Please, just try." It was nearly midnight when Sarah finally gave in, sitting on her mattress with Emma asleep beside her, Jessica's words echoing in her tired mind. She downloaded the app with shaking fingers, chose a photo Jessica had taken of her last month at the park, Emma just out of frame. Under interests she wrote, "Single mom, coffee, surviving." Under what she was looking for, honesty. She hit submit before she could delete it all, then turned off her phone and lay down next to her daughter, certain nothing would come of it anyway. The notification came 3 days later while Sarah was scrubbing a conference room floor at 2 in the morning. She almost didn't check it, but her phone kept buzzing with a persistence that felt almost urgent. Daniel Carter had matched with her. Sarah sat back on her heels, cleaning supplies scattered around her, and stared at the profile with growing disbelief. The man in the photos looked like he had stepped out of a magazine. Dark hair touched with gray at the temples, blue eyes that somehow managed to look both confident and sad. His bio was simple. Businessman, looking for something real. Lost too much to settle for anything less. Sarah scrolled through his pictures with suspicion blooming in her chest. Men like this did not match with exhausted waitresses who listed surviving as a hobby. Men like this did not swipe right on single mothers living in studio apartments with past due bills stacked like accusations. She hovered her thumb over the unmatch button, certain this was a mistake or worse, some kind of cruel joke. But then a message appeared. "I hope this doesn't sound forward, but there was something in your eyes in your photo. You look like someone who understands that life isn't easy but keeps going anyway. I respect that more than I can say." Sarah read it 5 times, searching for the angle, the manipulation, the inevitable request for photos, or the smooth talk that would lead nowhere. But another message followed. "I'm probably not what you're looking for. I work too much. I'm not great at small talk, but I promise I'm genuine, and if you give me a chance to prove that, I will." She almost unmatched him that night and again the next morning, and 3 more times over the following week. But something in his words felt raw, unpolished, like he was fumbling through this as much as she was. When he sent a message about how he'd burned his coffee that morning and it had somehow ruined his entire meeting, Sarah found herself laughing for the first time in months. She typed back before she could stop herself. "Try working a breakfast rush with burnt coffee. Now that's a crisis." His response was immediate. "Tell me about it." And somehow, impossibly, she did. The messages came at odd hours, which Sarah appreciated because her schedule existed outside normal human rhythms. Daniel would text at 11 at night asking what her favorite meal was. And Sarah would respond at 3 in the morning during her cleaning shift that she couldn't remember the last time she'd had a favorite anything. He didn't send empty compliments or generic questions. He asked what kept her going on the hardest days. He asked what she dreamed about before exhaustion became her only companion. He asked what made her laugh, and when she said she couldn't remember, he made it his mission to find out. During her dinner break at the diner, Sarah's phone would buzz with absurd stories from his day. A client who insisted on conducting an entire meeting in rhyme, a pigeon that had somehow infiltrated his office and refused to leave. She found herself laughing into her cold coffee, her coworkers glancing over with curious smiles because they hadn't heard that sound from her in so long. He mentioned loss once, briefly, saying he understood what it meant to survive something that should have destroyed you, but he didn't elaborate and Sarah didn't push. They both carried scars too deep for casual conversation. 2 weeks in, Sarah decided to test the waters. She mentioned Emma casually, almost carelessly, while describing her morning. Had to change 3 diapers before 6 a.m. My daughter has impeccable timing. She sent it and immediately regretted it, waiting for the sudden silence, the slow fade, the inevitable retreat. Instead, his response came within minutes. She sounds like she keeps you on your toes. How old is she? Sarah stared at her phone, something fragile and terrifying blooming in her chest. 6 months. She's everything. The pause felt eternal before his next message appeared. What's her name? And when Sarah typed Emma, he responded with something that made tears sting her eyes. That's beautiful. Tell me about her. What does she love? What makes her smile? He didn't run. He asked about her daughter like Emma was a person worth knowing, not an obstacle to overcome. And Sarah felt the walls she'd built start to crumble. When Daniel suggested they meet for dinner, Sarah's hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped her phone. She typed yes before fear could change her mind, then spent 3 days planning every detail with the precision of someone who knew how easily everything could fall apart. Mrs. Chen from apartment 204 agreed to watch Emma, waving away Sarah's offered payment with her wrinkled hand and kind smile. You go. Have nice time. Baby will be safe with me. Sarah used 2 weeks of tip money to buy a dress from the clearance rack at Target. Simple and navy blue, nothing fancy but clean and whole without any stains or frayed edges. She tried it on in the cramped bathroom, staring at her reflection and barely recognizing the woman looking back. When had she last dressed for anything other than work or sleep? The day arrived with cruel slowness. Each hour dragging like years while Sarah worked her morning shift at the diner, her mind spinning with anxious possibilities. She had texted Daniel the address, Giovanni's, the Italian place he'd suggested. And her stomach had dropped, seeing the photos online. White tablecloths, crystal glasses. She didn't belong in a place like that. But maybe, just maybe, she could pretend for one evening. 2 hours before she was supposed to leave, her phone rang. Mrs. Chen's voice was tight with distress. Sarah, I so sorry. My sister in Boston. She fall downstairs. I have to go now. Catch bus tonight. I cannot watch Emma. The words hit like physical blows, and Sarah heard herself saying, of course, go. Please don't worry. Even as panic flooded her veins. She hung up and immediately started calling down her contact list. Jessica was working a double shift. Her other coworker had her own kids. The teenager down the hall was at her boyfriend's house. Each no felt like a door slamming shut. And Sarah found herself sitting on the floor of her apartment. Emma playing happily with blocks beside her, the navy dress hanging on the bathroom door like a promise that would never be kept. She had been stupid to hope. Stupid to think she could have one night, one moment, one chance at something normal. Sarah stared at her phone. Daniel's message glowing in the darkness of her apartment like a small star. Getting excited for tonight. Can't wait to finally meet you. She could cancel. It would be easy. A simple lie about feeling sick, about Emma being fussy, about anything other than the truth that she was a struggling single mother whose entire life balanced on the edge of chaos. He would understand. He would probably be relieved. They could reschedule and she could find another babysitter and pretend for one night that her reality was anything other than what it was. But something in Sarah's chest twisted at the thought. Something that felt dangerously close to regret. She had spent 6 months surviving, not living. 6 months putting every dream, every hope, every desire on hold because she had Emma to think about, and bills to pay, and no room for anything else. What if this was her one chance? What if she let fear win again? Emma babbled from her playmat, oblivious to her mother's crisis. And Sarah looked at her daughter's perfect face. This was her reality. Emma was her reality, beautiful and exhausting and all-consuming. If Daniel couldn't accept that, better to know now than to waste weeks building something on a foundation of lies. Sarah picked up her phone with shaking hands. She typed, "I'm so sorry, but something came up and I can't make it." She deleted it. She typed, "My babysitter canceled. Can we reschedule?" She deleted it. She typed, "This probably isn't going to work out." Deleted. Her finger hovered over the keyboard, her heart hammering against her ribs like it was trying to escape. Emma deserved a mother who was brave. Emma deserved a mother who didn't hide. Sarah took a breath that felt like drowning and typed the truth. "Something came up with my babysitter. Would you mind if I brought my daughter?" She hit send before courage could desert her, then watched the message appear in the thread with a terror that made her hands shake. The phone slipped from her fingers onto the floor. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only wait for the response that would either change everything or confirm what she already knew. That hope was just another word for heartbreak waiting to happen. Giovanni's stood on the corner of 5th and Madison like a palace Sarah had no right to enter. Its windows glowing with warm light, its doors polished to a mirror shine. She stood on the sidewalk outside, clutching Emma's carrier with both hands, her second-hand dress suddenly feeling thin as paper, cheap as cardboard. The navy fabric that had looked decent in her bathroom mirror now seemed dull and worn beneath the restaurant's elegant glow. She could see other diners through the windows, women in silk and diamonds, men in suits that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Daniel's response to her terrified text had been simple, almost eager. "Of course, I'd love to meet her." But standing here now, Sarah wondered if he'd understood what he was agreeing to. The hostess looked up as Sarah pushed through the door, her smile professional and cold as winter. Her eyes traveling from Sarah's face to the baby carrier, with barely concealed disapproval. "Reservation?" The word came out sharp, dismissive. "Carter," Sarah whispered, and hated how small her voice sounded. The hostess's eyebrows rose slightly, but she gestured toward the back. Sarah felt every eye in the restaurant turn toward her as she walked through the maze of white-clothed tables. The soft clink of expensive silverware seemed to pause. Conversations dipped to whispers. She heard it in the silence. The judgment, the question hanging in the air like smoke. What is she doing here? Emma shifted in the carrier, making a small sound. And Sarah's grip tightened until her knuckles went white. Then she saw him. Daniel Carter stood from a corner table, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. He was more handsome than his photos, impossibly so. His dark suit fitted perfectly to his frame, his presence commanding the space around him like gravity. He belonged here. She did not. The distance between them felt insurmountable, not measured in feet but in tax brackets and lived experiences, and the unbridgeable gap between his world and hers. Sarah stopped walking. Her feet simply refused to move forward. She could turn around, leave, send an apologetic text from the parking lot, save them both the embarrassment. But then Daniel's eyes found hers across the restaurant, and something in his expression stopped her from running. Daniel's eyes moved from Sarah's face down to the carrier in her hands, and Sarah saw it happen in slow motion. The recognition, the understanding, the moment he realized what he had agreed to. This was it. The disappointment would come now, carefully masked behind polite excuses. He would glance at his expensive watch and remember an urgent call, an important meeting, anything to escape gracefully. Sarah had seen that look before on Tyler's face. That moment when reality crashed through fantasy and a man decided she was not worth the complication. She couldn't bear to see it again. She rushed forward, crossing the space between them in quick, desperate steps, words spilling from her mouth before she could stop them. "I'm so sorry. I know this isn't what you expected. My sitter canceled, and I couldn't find anyone, and I should have just canceled, but I didn't want to, and I understand completely if you want to leave." The words tumbled over each other, frantic and breathless. Emma began to fuss in the carrier, as if sensing her mother's panic, and Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes. "I can go, right now. This was a mistake. I shouldn't have come. I shouldn't have even suggested it. Men don't want to deal with babies on a first date, and I don't blame you. I really don't, and I'm sorry for wasting your time." She was backing away as she spoke, already turning toward the door, already calculating how fast she could get to her car before the tears came. But she made herself look at him one more time, forced herself to meet his eyes so she could remember this moment, this final proof that hope was just another form of pain. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, the words breaking on her lips. "I'm so sorry." And she waited for him to let her go, to nod politely and return to his table, to his perfect life that had no room for struggling waitresses and their crying babies. She waited for the ending she had always known was coming. Daniel's face transformed, but not in the way Sarah had braced herself for. Not with disappointment or irritation, or that careful mask of politeness people wore when they wanted to escape. His expression shifted into something Sarah couldn't quite identify, something that looked almost like recognition, like relief, like a man who had been searching for something and finally found it. His eyes moved to Emma in the carrier, and they softened in a way that made Sarah's prepared apologies die in her throat. "May I?" Daniel asked quietly, and his voice carried a tremor Sarah had never heard in their text messages. He gestured toward the carrier, not toward the door, not toward an exit, but toward her daughter. Sarah nodded because she had lost the ability to speak, confusion flooding through her panic. Daniel knelt down slowly, carefully, until he was at Emma's level. His expensive suit jacket touched the restaurant floor, but he didn't seem to notice or care. "Hello there, beautiful girl," he said, and his voice was so gentle it made Sarah's chest ache. Emma's fussing stopped immediately. She looked up at this stranger with wide eyes. Then her face split into one of those gummy smiles that could light up the darkest room. She gurgled, a happy baby sound, and reached one tiny hand toward Daniel's face. Something flickered across Daniel's expression then. Something profound and devastating. Pain and joy twisted together so tightly they became indistinguishable. His hand moved toward Emma's, and Sarah watched his fingers tremble as the baby grasped his thumb with surprising strength. "Look at you," Daniel whispered, and Sarah heard something break in his voice. "You're perfect." A tear slipped down his cheek before he could stop it, and he didn't wipe it away. He just stayed there, kneeling on the floor of this expensive restaurant, holding her daughter's tiny hand like it was the most precious thing in the world. Sarah stood frozen, her mind spinning. Because this was not disappointment. This was not a man looking for an escape. This was something else entirely. Something she didn't understand but could feel radiating from him like heat, grief, and longing, and a tenderness so raw it hurt to witness. Daniel stood and pulled out Sarah's chair before she could fully process what was happening, his hand gentle on her elbow as he guided her to sit. Emma was still gripping his thumb, refusing to let go, and he laughed softly. "I think she likes me." The waiter appeared, and before Sarah could ask, Daniel was already speaking. "Could we get a high chair, please? And perhaps some warm water in a bowl in case we need to heat a bottle?" The waiter nodded, hurrying away. And Sarah stared at Daniel with something close to shock. Men didn't think of these things. Tyler certainly never had, but Daniel was already lifting Emma from the carrier with practiced ease, supporting her head, settling her against his chest like he had done this 1,000 times before. The high chair arrived and Daniel positioned it between them, making silly faces at Emma as he did, crossing his eyes and puffing out his cheeks until the baby dissolved into delighted giggles. The sound filled the restaurant, bright and pure, and Sarah saw other diners turning not with annoyance but with genuine smiles. An elderly woman at the next table caught Sarah's eye and nodded approvingly. Throughout dinner, Daniel talked to Sarah about everything and nothing, asking about her day, her dreams, the book she wished she had time to read. But his attention kept returning to Emma, checking on her with a naturalness that took Sarah's breath away. He handed the baby her pacifier before she could fuss. He wiped drool from her chin with his cloth napkin without hesitation. He bounced her gently when she started to get restless, all while maintaining conversation with Sarah as if this was the most normal thing in the world. Emma reached for Daniel's face again and he let her, those tiny fingers grabbing his nose, and he pretended she had stolen it, making her laugh so hard she hiccuped. Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes, but they weren't tears of stress or exhaustion or fear. They were something else entirely. Something she was afraid to name because naming it would make it real, and real things could hurt you. This couldn't be happening. Men like Daniel didn't exist, but here he was, holding her daughter, looking at Sarah like she was exactly what he had been searching for. Sarah watched Daniel's hand as he reached for Emma's pacifier, and she saw it then, the slight tremor in his fingers that he couldn't quite control. He handed it to Emma with perfect gentleness, but something in the gesture felt weighted, like he was handling something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile. There was something in his eyes when he looked at her daughter, something that lived beneath his smile like a shadow at the bottom of deep water. Ancient, sad, a grief so profound it had become part of him. "You're good with her," Sarah said softly, the words barely above a whisper. She meant it as a compliment, but it came out like a question, like she was asking for the truth he was hiding behind his careful kindness. Daniel's smile faltered. For a moment his whole face seemed to crack, revealing something raw beneath the surface, and Sarah saw him struggle to hold himself together. "I had practice once," he said, and each word sounded like it cost him something vital. The shadow crossed his face then, unmistakable and devastating, profound loss etched into every line of his expression. His hand moved to Emma's head, smoothing down her soft hair with infinite tenderness, and Sarah watched a muscle jump in his jaw. "Once?" he repeated, and the word hung in the air between them heavy as stone. Sarah's breath caught. She understood in that instant, in the way his eyes went distant and dark, in the way his hand lingered on Emma's head like he was memorizing the feeling. He had lost someone, a child, his child. The knowledge settled into Sarah's chest with terrible certainty, and she felt her heart break for this man she barely knew, but suddenly understood with painful clarity. She whispered, but she didn't know what else to say. What words existed for a loss like that? What comfort could she possibly offer? He looked up at her, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. He said, "I should have told you. When I saw you with her, when you apologized for bringing her, I thought this might be my only chance to remember what it felt like." His voice broke on the last word, and Sarah reached across the table, covered his trembling hand with hers, and held on. "Tell me," Sarah said gently, and perhaps it was the softness in her voice, or the understanding in her eyes, or simply the fact that he had been carrying this alone for so long. But Daniel's story spilled out like water breaking through a dam. 3 years ago he had everything. A wife named Rebecca who laughed at his terrible jokes and danced with him in the kitchen at midnight. A baby daughter named Lily, 6 months old, with his eyes and Rebecca's smile and a grip strong enough to hold his entire heart. They were driving home from his mother's house on a rainy October night, Rebecca singing to Lily in the back seat. Daniel thinking about how impossibly lucky he was. The drunk driver ran the red light at 70 miles an hour. Daniel saw the headlights too late. The impact was instantaneous. Daniel woke up in the hospital without a scratch on him, not a single broken bone, while his wife and daughter were already gone. He had survived, and they had not. And there was no logic to it, no fairness, no reason except the cruel randomness of physics and timing. "I spent 3 years trying to make sense of it," Daniel said, his voice hollow. "I built my company into an empire. I made millions. I bought everything I could think of, a penthouse, cars, art, things that were supposed to mean success. He laughed, but it was bitter and broken. I could buy anything except what I actually wanted. I couldn't buy them back. I couldn't buy a single moment with them back. He looked at Emma, still babbling happily in her high chair, oblivious to the grief hanging over the table. I tried dating. Women saw the money, the success. They didn't see me. They didn't understand that I was just a man who survived something he shouldn't have survived and has been alone in it ever since. His eyes met Sarah's, and they were raw with 3 years of unshed tears. Until tonight. Until I saw you walk in with her and apologize like she was a burden when she's actually everything that matters. Sarah felt tears streaming down her own face, and she didn't bother wiping them away. Daniel took a shaky breath and continued, his words coming faster now, like he needed to confess everything before courage abandoned him. You've probably seen the buildings downtown with my name on them. Real estate empire across 6 states, investments in tech startups, commercial properties, ventures I don't even keep track of anymore. I made my first million at 30. By 32, I had 10. Now I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. He said it without pride, just stating facts that meant nothing. I live in a penthouse on the 42nd floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. 5,000 square feet. 4 bedrooms I never use. A kitchen where I've never cooked a meal. It's beautiful. Everyone says it's beautiful. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. It feels like a mausoleum, like I'm living in a monument to everything I lost. Sarah listened, her hand still covering his, and watched the pain radiating from him in waves. The women I've dated, they see the penthouse first. The car, the restaurants I can take them to. They see Carter Industries and dollar signs and a lifestyle they want access to. He looked at Sarah with something desperate in his eyes. No one saw me. The broken man underneath all of it. The father who can't walk past the baby section in a store without falling apart. The husband who still sets 2 places at the table sometimes before he remembers. He squeezed her hand tighter. Then I saw your profile. Something in your eyes. You looked like you understood what it meant to survive something that should have destroyed you. You looked real in a way I hadn't seen in 3 years. His voice cracked. I didn't tell you about the money because I didn't want you to see Carter Industries. I wanted you to see Daniel, the man who texts you at midnight, the man who burned his coffee, the man who just wants one real thing in a life full of expensive emptiness. He looked at Emma, then back at Sarah. I'm sorry I wasn't honest. I was scared you'd disappear like everyone else. Or worse, that you'd stay for the wrong reasons. Sarah felt something break open inside her chest, all the walls she had built crumbling under the weight of his honesty. If he could be brave enough to share his truth, she could do the same. His name was Tyler, she said, her voice shaking. He seemed perfect at first. Charming. Attentive. He said all the right things about wanting a future together. I believed him. She looked down at their joined hands. I got pregnant. We weren't planning it, but I thought, maybe this is meant to be. Maybe we'll figure it out together. The memory still had the power to steal her breath. I told him at his apartment, showed him the test. He looked at me like I had just ruined his entire life. Tears slipped down her cheeks. He said he wasn't ready to be a father. Said he needed time to think. I left, and he blocked my number that same night. Blocked me on everything. When I went back to his apartment 2 days later, the landlord said he'd moved out, left no forwarding address. Daniel's hand tightened on hers, but Sarah couldn't stop now. I tried to find him, called his work. They said he'd transferred to the Seattle office. He ran to another state to get away from me, from us. He wanted nothing to do with his own daughter. Her voice broke completely. I've been alone since Emma was born, working 16 hours a day, and it's still not enough. The bills keep coming. I'm terrified every single day that I'm failing her, that I can't give her what she deserves, that loving her isn't enough when I can't afford the formula she needs or the clothes she'll outgrow in weeks. She looked at Emma, sleeping now in the high chair, peaceful and perfect. Some days I don't know how I'll survive, how we'll survive. I'm so tired I can't think straight. So scared I can barely breathe. But she's everything, Daniel. She's my reason to keep fighting even when I have nothing left to fight with." Sarah met his eyes, her own streaming with tears. "So I understand being broken. I understand loss. Maybe not the same way you do, but I understand what it means to survive something that should have destroyed you." Emma's cry cut through their conversation like a knife, sharp and wrong. Not her normal fussy protest, but something that made Sarah's blood turn to ice. She was out of her chair before conscious thought, lifting Emma from the high chair, and the moment her hands touched her daughter's skin, she knew. Emma was burning. Not warm. Burning. Her tiny body was rigid, trembling, her face flushed deep red, her cry weak and strained. "Oh, God," Sarah whispered, and panic flooded her veins like poison. "Oh, God, she's sick. She's really sick." Her hands shook as she pressed her palm to Emma's forehead, feeling the heat radiating from her daughter's small body. This wasn't normal. This was dangerous. Emma needed a doctor, now. But Sarah's car was at home because she couldn't afford the parking downtown. The hospital was 5 miles away. She didn't have money for a cab. An ambulance would cost thousands she didn't have, but what choice did she have when her daughter was burning up in her arms? Sarah fumbled for her phone with one hand while clutching Emma with the other, her fingers clumsy with terror, trying to dial 911 while Emma's cries grew weaker, more desperate. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel her daughter's fever burning through her shirt and know with absolute certainty that she was failing, that she couldn't save her own child because she didn't even have a car. "My car is outside." Daniel's voice cut through her panic, calm but urgent. The voice of someone who knew how to act in a crisis. He was already standing, already grabbing Emma's carrier, already moving. "I'll drive. Now." He pulled out his wallet, threw several $100 bills on the table without counting, and turned to Sarah with fierce intensity. "Children's Hospital on Grant Street. We can be there in 10 minutes, come on." Sarah didn't question, didn't hesitate. She followed Daniel through the restaurant, Emma wailing weakly against her chest, and prayed they weren't already too late. Daniel transformed into someone else entirely the moment they hit the sidewalk. Gone was the grief-stricken man sharing his pain over dinner. In his place stood someone focused, efficient. He stripped off his suit jacket and wrapped it around Emma's trembling body, his movements quick but gentle. "Keep her warm," he said, already lifting the carrier with one hand while guiding Sarah with the other toward a sleek black Mercedes parked at the curb. The car's interior was leather and luxury, but Sarah barely noticed, climbing into the passenger seat with Emma clutched against her chest, feeling her daughter's fever burning through Daniel's jacket. The engine roared to life, and Daniel was already pulling into traffic, weaving through cars with practiced ease, his jaw set with determination. He pulled out his phone, pressed a button. "Dr. Martinez. It's Daniel Carter. I'm bringing a 6-month-old to Children's Hospital. High fever, possible infection. I need her seen immediately. I don't care who you have to pull. This is an emergency." He listened for a moment. 10 minutes. Have someone waiting at the entrance. Sarah was crying in the passenger seat, great gasping sobs she couldn't control, watching the city lights blur past while Emma's cries grew weaker. This was her worst nightmare, the thing she feared most. Her daughter sick and Sarah powerless to help. "She's going to be fine," Daniel said, and his voice cut through her panic like an anchor. He reached over without taking his eyes off the road, found Sarah's hand, squeezed it with fierce intensity. "I promise you, Sarah, I won't let anything happen to her." His voice was steel and certainty. "I have the best pediatrician in the state waiting for us. Emma is going to be fine. Do you hear me? She's going to be fine." Sarah looked at him through her tears. This man she had met only an hour ago, this stranger who was driving through red lights and calling in favors and making promises like he had the power to bend the universe to his will. And somehow, impossibly, Sarah believed him. She wasn't alone anymore. For the first time since Emma was born, she wasn't facing this terror alone. The emergency room was chaos and fluorescent lights. Nurses moving with quick efficiency. Machines beeping their urgent rhythms. Dr. Martinez appeared within minutes of their arrival. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and steady hands. And she took Emma from Sarah's arms with practiced gentleness. Sarah stood in the examination room watching them work, Daniel's hand solid on her shoulder, anchoring her to reality while her mind spun with terror. After what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes, Dr. Martinez turned with a small smile. Severe ear infection. It's painful, and the fever is concerning, but it's treatable. We'll start her on antibiotics immediately and keep her overnight for observation. Relief flooded Sarah so powerfully, her knees buckled, and Daniel caught her, held her up. Emma would be fine. Her daughter would be fine. Then the nurse appeared with a clipboard and paperwork, and Sarah saw the estimate at the bottom of the form. Emergency room visit, overnight stay, specialist consultation. The numbers swam together into an impossible sum, thousands of dollars, and Sarah felt her world crumbling all over again. She didn't have insurance that would cover this. She had the bare minimum state assistance that barely paid for routine checkups. This would bankrupt her, destroy her. She would lose her apartment, lose everything. "I can't," she whispered, staring at the numbers. "I can't afford this." Before she could even finish the sentence, Daniel was moving. He strode to the registration desk, and Sarah watched through the window as he spoke to the woman there. Pulling out a black credit card, signing forms. When he returned, his expression was calm, resolved. "It's handled." Sarah's throat closed. "Daniel, no. I can't let you. That's thousands of dollars. I can't. Let me do this." His voice was fierce, intense, and he grabbed both her hands, forcing her to look at him. "Please, Sarah. Let me help. I have more money than I know what to do with, and it means nothing. But this? Helping Emma? Helping you? This means everything." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. "I can't pay you back. I'll never be able to pay you back." Daniel's eyes were bright with emotion. "I don't want you to pay me back. I just want her to be okay. I want you both to be okay." And Sarah broke, sobbing into his chest while he held her like she was something precious worth protecting. The hospital room was dim and quiet, machines beeping softly in rhythm with Emma's peaceful breathing. The antibiotics had worked quickly, bringing her fever down, easing her pain, and now she slept in the small hospital crib wrapped in white blankets. Sarah had collapsed into the chair beside the crib around 2 in the morning, exhaustion finally claiming her, her body folding into sleep despite her mind's protests. Daniel stayed awake. He pulled the other chair close to the crib and kept watch, his eyes never leaving Emma's small chest as it rose and fell with steady breaths. Every hour a nurse came to check vitals, and he nodded silently, noting every detail, making sure his promise was kept. She would be fine. He would make certain of it. Morning light filtered through the window, soft and golden. And Sarah woke slowly to find the room transformed by dawn. Her neck ached from the angle she'd slept at. And for a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then, she saw Daniel. He was holding Emma. The baby was awake, looking up at him with clear eyes, her fever broken, her small hand wrapped around his finger. And Daniel was crying. Tears streamed down his face unchecked, falling onto his wrinkled dress shirt, and he didn't bother wiping them away. He just held Emma with infinite tenderness, his large hands cradling her tiny body like she was made of light and air, and every precious thing that had ever existed. "I thought I'd never get to hold a baby again," he whispered, and his voice broke on every word. "I thought that part of my life was over, that I'd lost my chance." He looked up at Sarah with eyes that held 3 years of grief and this one moment of healing. "Thank you. Thank you for letting me be here, for not sending me away." Sarah felt her own tears start. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were something else entirely, something that felt like understanding, like recognition, like two broken pieces finding they fit together perfectly. They were both shattered, both surviving losses that should have destroyed them. Both so desperately alone until this impossible night brought them together. Daniel needed to remember what it felt like to hold a child, to protect, to love without fear. Sarah needed someone who saw her struggle and didn't turn away, who understood that strength sometimes looked like exhaustion, that love sometimes looked like barely surviving. They were exactly what the other needed. Broken and healing and whole in their brokenness together. 6 months later, Sarah woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and the sound of Emma's delighted laughter echoing from the kitchen. She patted down the hallway of Daniel's penthouse, no longer a mausoleum but a home filled with toys scattered across expensive rugs and finger paintings taped to walls that once held priceless art. She found Daniel at the stove making pancakes, Emma in her high chair banging a spoon with enthusiastic rhythm, and her heart swelled with something that still felt too big to name. They had moved in 2 months ago, not because Sarah needed Daniel's money, but because coming home to separate apartments had started to feel wrong, like trying to split something that was meant to be whole. Daniel had proposed on Emma's first birthday. Getting down on one knee in front of a smash cake and 20 of their closest friends, tears streaming down his face as he asked Sarah to let him be Emma's father in every way that mattered. The ring was simple, elegant, and Sarah had said yes before he finished asking. Sarah was back in school now, studying to become a nurse. Her classes funded by Daniel's support, but driven by her own dreams of helping others the way she wished someone had helped her during those desperate months. She attended lectures while Emma stayed with Daniel, who had restructured his entire work schedule to be present, to be the father he thought he'd lost the chance to become. Daniel had started the Carter Foundation for Single Parents, pouring millions into childcare assistance, housing support, and emergency funds for families barely surviving. Every person they helped was a piece of Rebecca and Lily's legacy, a way to transform his grief into something that gave life instead of taking it. Emma pulled herself up on Daniel's leg, her first word tumbling from her lips with perfect clarity. "Dada." Daniel froze, the spatula trembling in his hand, and Sarah watched him sink to his knees and gather Emma into his arms, sobbing into her soft hair while their daughter patted his face with chubby hands. They were building something beautiful from their broken pieces, Sarah thought. Watching the man who had saved them hold the daughter who had saved him. Love had found them when neither was looking for it, but both desperately needed it. And somehow that made it more precious than anything they could have planned.